He was wearing a jade bracelet the morning they took him. Green stone, red thread. It had belonged to his grandmother and her mother before that. Going back through generations his family couldn't fully name anymore. His mother tied it on his wrist herself that morning, the same way her own mother had once tied it on hers. It was the kind of object that carries an entire bloodline inside it. They found the bracelet 73 years later, still on his wrist. He had no idea where it came from. February 14th, 1951, Portland, Oregon, Valentine's Day. 6-year-old Evan Shaw vanished from Laurelhurst Park on a Tuesday afternoon while his mother was 3 blocks away buying flour and sugar. His 8-year-old brother Neil stood at the edge of the sandbox and watched him leave. A woman had appeared at the park gate wearing a brown wool coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled down against the February cold. She said 4 words to Evan that made perfect sense to a child who trusted the world. "Your mom needs you." Neil watched his little brother take the woman's hand. He watched them walk past the fountain, past the oak trees lining the path, out through the iron gate and onto the street. He didn't follow. She had known their mother's name. 10 minutes later, Neil ran to find Grace Shaw at the grocery store on Burnside. She dropped her basket. Flour hit the floor. She ran. She searched every inch of Laurelhurst Park, screaming her son's name until her voice turned to gravel and then silence. Evan was gone. He would not be found for 73 years. I need you to sit with that number. Not skim past it. Sit with it. 73 years. Evan Shaw was 6 years old the morning he disappeared. He was 79 years old when the truth finally surfaced. In between those 2 moments, 6 and 79, a complete human life had been built and lived. A career spanning 3 decades, a marriage of 41 years, children, grandchildren, a retirement, a tan house in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with a garden he tended every morning, not 1 second of it under his own name. Here's what separates this case from every other missing child story I've ever covered. Evan Shaw didn't die. He didn't suffer. He wasn't found in a field or a basement. He wasn't a tragedy in the way we usually mean that word. He was given a new identity, a new history, a new state, a new mother. And then he was loved, genuinely, completely, without condition, by the woman who took him. When the DNA match finally surfaced in 2024, the man living as Warren Mitchell in Albuquerque had no memory of Portland, no memory of the sandbox, no memory of his brother Neil's face, no memory of a mother who had spent 37 years writing him letters she could never send. He didn't know he was a missing person. He didn't know he was anyone but Warren Mitchell. This is the story of a kidnapping that was also, somehow, a life. A crime that lasted 73 years and hurt no one and devastated everyone. A reunion that came too late for almost every person who had been waiting for it. And a jade bracelet that never left his wrist. Grace Shaw was 36 years old in the winter of 1951. She had come to Portland from Salem 2 years earlier with her husband Henry, who worked the overnight shift at the Albina rail yard loading freight. They rented a narrow green house on Hancock Street, 3 blocks from the east edge of Laurelhurst Park. They had 2 boys. Neil was the older one, 8 years old, cautious, watchful, the kind of child who checked both ways twice and then checked again. He had started reading the newspaper at 7, working through headlines he didn't fully understand but felt he should track. Grace sometimes caught him standing in doorways, studying rooms before entering them, as if he was mapping escape routes. She thought he would make an excellent engineer, or a very nervous adult. Evan was different. Evan was 6 years old and constitutionally incapable of passing a stranger without saying hello. He named every cat in the neighborhood. He informed the bus driver on their Saturday errands that his favorite color was the green that happens right before it rains. He collected interesting rocks in his coat pockets until the pockets tore. He had once, at age 4, attempted to adopt a pigeon. On the morning of February 14, 1951, Evan had informed Grace that the jade bracelet she was tying on his wrist was talking to him because he could feel it vibrate against his pulse. Grace had laughed. She told him that was his heartbeat, his own blood moving. He went completely still. Then he pressed the bracelet harder against his wrist and listened. "It's the loudest thing I've ever heard," he said. That moment, her son discovering his own heartbeat in a jade bracelet on a February morning, is the last vivid scene Grace Shaw ever recorded in her journals. She wrote it down that evening. She couldn't have known why she would need it. She wrote it down because it was beautiful. Henry was sleeping after his night shift when Grace decided to walk to the grocery on Burnside. 20 minutes there and back. She needed flour, sugar, a stick of butter. She was making a Valentine's cake. She told the boys to stay near the sandbox. She could see the park from the corner. She would be back before they had time to get into anything. She was gone 18 minutes. Neil Shaw calculated those 2 missing minutes, the difference between 20 and 18, for the next 60 years. The woman who took Evan was not a random predator. She was not a stranger passing through. She had been in Portland for 6 years. She attended St. Philip's on Belmont every Sunday. Her neighbors described her as quiet, immaculate, kind. She brought soup to the Hendersons next door when their eldest had scarlet fever. She kept her small yard on Morrison Street in perfect order through every season. Her name was Dorothy Parsons. She was 41 years old, and she had been quietly, methodically coming apart for 2 years. Between 1945 and 1950, Dorothy had been admitted to Emmanuel Hospital 3 times. Each admission, a failed pregnancy. The first at 35, the second at 38, the third, the final one, at 40, which left her body unable to try again. The doctor had been careful with his language. Dorothy had understood every word anyway. What no one knew, what wouldn't be reconstructed until genealogist Irene Blake pulled Dorothy's personal records in 2024, was what Dorothy had been doing in the months before February 14th. Her private journals, later found in a trunk in Albuquerque, documented in precise, frightening detail. She had been visiting Laurelhurst Park on weekday afternoons, watching the mothers with their children, writing about them in the evenings, not with malice, but with the aching, clinical attention of someone compiling evidence for a case they're building against themselves. She had introduced herself to Grace Shaw on a bench in November 1950. A friendly exchange, 2 women watching children in a park. Dorothy had complimented Evan's coat. Grace had laughed and said he'd already torn 1 pocket. They had talked for 20 minutes. Dorothy had remembered every detail. On Valentine's Day, when she saw Grace rise from the bench and walk toward the shops, she made the decision. 4 words to a 6-year-old. A hand to hold. A gate. A street. A Greyhound bus south by evening. By the time Portland police issued their first bulletin, Dorothy Parsons and Evan Shaw had already crossed into California. Neil Shaw's witness statement, transcribed by Portland Police Detective Raymond Hollis on the afternoon of February 14, 1951, is 2 paragraphs long. He was 8. He did the best he could. He described the woman as old, with a brown coat and hair under a hat. He said she had a nice voice, not scary. He said she didn't pull Evan or grab him. Evan went willingly. He said she'd told Evan their mom needed help carrying the groceries. He said Evan had waved at him from the gate. Not a frightened wave, not a confused wave. A cheerful, ordinary wave. The kind a 6-year-old gives his brother when he's going somewhere and will be back shortly. That wave destroyed Neil Shaw. Not the disappearance itself, as much as anything can destroy a child beyond the disappearance itself. It was the wave. Because the wave meant Evan wasn't scared. Evan thought he was doing the right thing. Evan thought he was helping. And there was nothing in that image that could be fixed or changed or done differently by an 8-year-old standing at a sandbox. Neil lived with that wave for 68 years. Portland police searched through the night and into the following days. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed bus drivers and shopkeepers, issued a citywide description of the woman and the child. They found witnesses who'd seen a woman in a brown coat on the Burnside streetcar heading south. They found the conductor who remembered her. Quiet, well-dressed, boy about 6, very well behaved. But by then the trail was cold. Dorothy had moved efficiently. She knew what she was doing. She had studied the problem for months, the way careful, intelligent, desperate people study problems they have already decided to solve. Within a week, she had settled in a rented house outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. She told her new neighbors she was a widow relocating after her husband's death. Her son was quiet, she said, still adjusting. He'd had a hard few weeks. She had a birth certificate, crafted in the weeks before the kidnapping, listing the child as Warren Parsons Mitchell, born Tucson, Arizona, 1945. The attending physician on the certificate had died in 1943. The hospital listed had burned in 1944. She had chosen them deliberately. They couldn't be called. They couldn't be contradicted. The jade bracelet, she told 6-year-old Evan as she settled him into his new bedroom, had been in her family for generations. He asked if he could keep wearing it. She said of course. Back in Portland, Grace Shaw began the search that would occupy the rest of her life. I want to be specific about what that looked like, because she searched for years does not capture it. By 1955, Grace had written to 43 police departments across Oregon, California, Washington, and New Mexico. By 1960, she had placed missing persons notices in 11 regional newspapers. She wrote to churches. She wrote to school district offices. She wrote to hospitals in cities where she had no particular reason to think Evan had gone. She wrote to them anyway, because writing was doing something, and doing something was the only alternative to the thing she refused to do. She kept records of every response, a filing system, folders by state, then city, then date, that Neil found in her closet when she died. 847 responses, leads that dissolved, sightings that didn't match, well-meaning strangers, and one letter from a man in Sacramento that terrified her for 3 weeks before it was ruled out. None of them were Evan. Henry Shaw died in 1967 from a stroke at 52. He had never stopped searching either, in his quieter way. driving on weekends to neighborhoods that matched the description of the woman in the brown coat, showing Evan's photograph to strangers who looked at it with polite confusion. Grace outlived him by 21 years. She died in 1988 at 73. When Neil cleaned out her bedroom, he found the box in the bedside drawer. 37 envelopes, sealed, never stamped, each one addressed in his mother's handwriting. Dear Evan, one for every birthday since 1951. She had written to her son every year for 37 years. She had sealed the letters. She had kept them in a box. She just had no address to put on them. She had never stopped expecting to find one. Neil Shaw never moved far from Laurelhurst Park. He raised his daughter Hannah in the same neighborhood where he'd grown up. He worked at the Port of Portland for 30 years, retired at 62. He was not a dramatic person. He didn't wear his grief on the surface. But the search was always there, underneath everything, like a current running below still water. He hired a private investigator in 1979, another in 1994. The first found nothing. The second found a man in Phoenix with a similar name, different person, different age, different family. Neil wrote the dead end in his notebook and turned the page. He attended 2 national missing persons conferences in the 1990s. He connected with families who understood what it was to search without finding. He was not bitter. That was the thing people who knew Neil said about him. He wasn't bitter. He was waiting. There's a difference. When DNA databases opened to civilians in the mid-2000s, Neil was 62 years old. He submitted a DNA sample to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in 2006. He uploaded to 2 ancestry platforms in 2008. He paid for the premium tier that promised faster processing and broader match pools. He checked for matches every morning before work, then after. Then, in the last years, from his phone at night before sleeping. In 2019, at 76, Neil Shaw died of heart failure in the same house where Evan had waved goodbye 68 years before. His DNA was still sitting in 3 databases, waiting. His daughter Hannah was 53 when he died. She had grown up watching her father watch for something she never fully understood as a child. Why a man who was otherwise calm and present would stand at the window sometimes, looking at nothing. She understood as an adult. She understood completely. Inheriting her father's files was like inheriting a language you already knew. The notebooks, the manila folders organized by state and year, the laminated copy of Evan's 1951 Missing Persons Report with its description and the line about the jade bracelet. The photographs of Grace and Neil and Evan, 2 boys in a backyard, caught mid-morning on a summer day, the younger one looking at the camera with total open astonishment. Hannah Ellison was not going to be the generation that filed it away. In January 2022, she uploaded her own DNA to 3 ancestry platforms and wrote the most detailed case notes she could fit into the profile fields. Missing person, Evan Shaw, Portland, Oregon, February 14, 1951. Would now be approximately 70 to 75 years old if living. Please contact immediately if you believe you may be related. Then she waited. 2 years and 9 months. Hannah was at her desk on a Wednesday morning in October 2024 when her phone buzzed. The notification was from Ancestry DNA. She read it twice. Then she put the phone down on her desk and stared at the wall for several seconds. Because 41% is not a third cousin. 41% is not a genealogical curiosity. 41% is first-generation family. Uncle, nephew, half-sibling. Evan would be 79 years old. She picked up the phone. The matching profile was sparse. A name listed as W. Mitchell. A location, Albuquerque, New Mexico. One photograph, a man in his late 70s sitting at a kitchen table, smiling at someone off camera with the slightly self-conscious look of a person whose grandchildren have just set up an account for them and insisted on a photo first. No family tree, no other information. She stared at the face. She was looking for something she couldn't quite name. A structural resemblance, the way a face is built underneath the features, which change over 70 years of living. The jaw, the forehead, the shape of the eyes. Maybe. She couldn't tell. She needed more. She spent the next 4 hours writing a message. She drafted it 8 times. Too formal, then not formal enough. Too much information, then not enough. She had one chance to not frighten this person away from responding. She had one chance to not sound like someone who had been waiting their entire life for this moment, even though she had. The final message read, "My name is Hannah Ellison. I'm reaching out because your DNA is a 41% match to mine, which suggests we may be closely related. My grandmother and father spent their lives searching for a family member who disappeared in Portland, Oregon in February 1951. His name was Evan Shaw. He would be 79 years old today. I understand this may come as a complete surprise, and I don't want to cause distress. Please take all the time you need, but I would be deeply grateful if you were willing to speak with me." She pressed send. Then she called a genealogist named Irene Blake. Irene Blake was 67 years old, recently retired from 30 years as a school librarian in Eugene, Oregon, and she had been doing cold case genealogy work for 12 years as what she called a hobby, and everyone around her called an obsession. She had a particular talent for pre-digital records, the county ledgers and church registries and hospital archives that existed before computers, surviving in basement filing rooms and microfiche drawers, and the personal collections of families who didn't know what they had. She knew which county clerks kept extra copies. She knew which state archives had digitized their oldest files, and which had simply stacked them in rooms and hoped for the best. She also had what she described as a very low threshold for being lied to by a document. Hannah found her through a missing persons forum. Their first phone call lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. Irene agreed to take the case that same afternoon. The first thing Irene did was build Warren Mitchell's family tree backward from the DNA match. Standard procedure. You start with what you have, a name, a location, a DNA percentage, and work outward through every available record until you find the connection, or eliminate it. What she found in the first 2 weeks was a clean, well-documented life. Warren Mitchell, born Tucson, Arizona, 1945, according to official records. Mother, Dorothy Parsons Mitchell. Father, unknown. Moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, around 1951. Attended public schools, graduated 1963. Bachelor's degree from the University of New Mexico, 1967. Taught history at Jefferson Middle School in Albuquerque from 1968 until his retirement in 1999. Married Eleanor Costa in 1974. 3 children, 7 grandchildren. Eleanor had died in 2016. Warren had lived alone in the Albuquerque house since. A complete, ordinary, deeply rooted American life. Except for the birth certificate. The birth certificate bothered Irene from the moment she obtained a certified copy from Arizona State Records. She sat with it at her kitchen table in Eugene for 2 hours, going through it line by line, not looking for what it said, but looking for what it couldn't quite commit to. And there it was. 2 things. The attending physician listed on Warren Mitchell's 1945 birth certificate was a Dr. Edmund Farr of Tucson, Arizona. Irene searched the Arizona Medical Licensing Board's historical records. Dr. Edmund Farr had died in September 1943, 22 months before Warren's listed birth date. The delivering hospital listed was St. Joseph's Medical Center, Tucson. Irene checked the Pima County Historical Archive. St. Joseph's had been destroyed by fire in July 1944, 16 months before Warren's listed birth date. Dorothy had been clever. She had chosen a dead doctor and a burned hospital because neither could be contacted, called, or contradicted. In 1951, in a country without computerized medical registries or cross-state verification systems, this was nearly foolproof. Nearly. Because Irene Blake was sitting at a kitchen table in Eugene in 2024 with a laptop and 60 years of accumulated archival instinct. And what Dorothy hadn't counted on was that someone would eventually check whether those sources existed at all. Irene called Hannah. The birth certificate is false. Not a theory. Not a possibility. The doctor was dead before the birth. The hospital was destroyed before the birth. This document was manufactured. The DNA match is 41%. Your great-uncle, if that's who he is alive and living in Albuquerque. We need to make contact. Hannah had already received a reply from W. Mitchell. His message was 12 sentences long, polite, measured, careful. He said he appreciated her reaching out, but found the DNA match puzzling and assumed it must be a database anomaly. He said his mother Dorothy had passed away in 2001 and that he had no knowledge of any family connection to Portland. He said he had been born in Tucson, and his mother had been very clear about his history. He said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Hannah forwarded it to Irene. Irene said, "He doesn't know." Hannah said, "How do I tell him?" Irene said, "You send him everything, all of it. You let the evidence speak, and you include one thing that can't be argued with." Hannah knew exactly what that was. Hannah sent Warren Mitchell a second message. She included the 41% DNA documentation from 2 independent labs, the 1951 Portland Police Missing Persons Report for Evan Shaw, with the full physical description, including the jade bracelet. A scan of the original newspaper notice Grace had placed in the Oregonian in March 1951. And 1 photograph. Not of Evan as a child. She didn't have a clear photo. The family had very few from that era, and none showed his face at the right angle. She sent a photograph of Grace Shaw. 1958. 7 years after Evan disappeared. Grace on the front steps of the Hancock Street house, holding a coffee cup, squinting slightly into the morning light. A woman in her 40s, dark hair, high cheekbones. Something about the way she held her jaw, a particular kind of stillness, like someone who has learned to be careful about what her face shows. Hannah sent the message and then went to sit in her car in the parking lot of her office building because she didn't trust herself to be around other people while she waited. She waited 3 weeks. When Warren Mitchell replied, the message was 3 words. "Can we talk?" They spoke by phone on a Thursday evening in November 2024. Warren had spent the 3 weeks since Hannah's second message doing the thing she had been doing for decades, searching. But he'd had somewhere specific to start. After receiving the photograph of Grace Shaw, he had gone to his attic. There was a trunk up there, wood banded with old leather straps, locks rusted shut. It had belonged to Dorothy. He had brought it from her apartment after she died in 2001 and put it in the attic without opening it, meaning to go through it sometime, the way people always mean to go through the things their parents leave behind. He'd never gone through it. He broke the rusted locks with a screwdriver and a hammer. Inside, 7 journals bundled with twine, a tin box of photographs, family snapshots, church outings, neighbors he didn't recognize, 3 winter coats folded carefully, and underneath everything, at the very bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a piece of flannel, 3 items that Warren Mitchell set on his attic floor and looked at for a long time. Item 1. A copy of the Portland Oregonian, dated March 3, 1951. Front page below the fold. Headline: Search continues for missing Portland boy, Evan Shaw, age 6. There was a small photograph, a school portrait, a boy with dark eyes looking directly at the camera. Warren Mitchell looked at the school portrait for a long time. He brought the newspaper downstairs and stood at the hallway mirror with it. Item 2. A letter, handwritten on plain stationery, addressed to no one, undated. Dorothy's handwriting. It read, "I know what I did was wrong, but he was so frightened those first weeks, and then he wasn't anymore, and then he was mine, and I couldn't go back. I told myself it was too late. Maybe it was always too late. I pray every night that his family has found peace." Item 3. A small photograph, creased along one edge, soft with age. A woman on porch steps, holding an infant. On the back, in someone else's handwriting, not Dorothy's, 4 words: Grace and Evan, 1945. On the phone, Warren's voice was steady for most of the call, measured. He told Hannah what he'd found, in the order he'd found it, the way someone recounts a sequence of events they are still internally processing. Then he said, "I look like her. The woman in the photo you sent. I look like her." Hannah said, "Yes, you do." He was quiet. Then, "She prayed that you found peace. Dorothy. She wrote that. Did you? Did your family?" Hannah told him about the birthday letters, all 37. She told him about the box in the bedside drawer, the sealed envelopes, the handwriting, "Dear Evan," on every one. She told him about Neil, about the park gate, about the databases and the yearly checks and the morning her father died without the answer. She heard Warren breathing. Then, quiet and precise, he said, "My God." And then nothing for a while. This is where the story complicates itself in a way I want to be careful about. Because Dorothy Parsons committed a crime. There is no softening that. She took a 6-year-old child from a park, forged his identity, moved him across state lines, and raised him as her own for 50 years, never once giving him the choice of knowing the truth. She stole 68 years of motherhood from Grace Shaw. She stole a brother from Neil. She stole a life that Evan Shaw was supposed to choose for himself. Let me say clearly and without ambiguity, what Dorothy Parsons did was monstrous. And then let me tell you who Dorothy Parsons was, because the full truth doesn't fit inside simple words. Irene Blake spent 8 months reconstructing Dorothy's life. Dorothy was born in Boise, Idaho in 1910, youngest of 4. Father died when she was 12. She married at 22 and spent the next 18 years trying and failing to have children. 3 pregnancies, 3 hospital admissions, 3 losses. The last one, in 1950, was the one the doctors told her was final. She was 40 years old. No husband, he had left in 1941, no children, no family nearby. She attended church and kept her yard immaculate and brought soup to sick neighbors, and she had been quietly dismantling from the inside for years. Her journals document this with unsettling clarity. She did not write like someone losing her grip on reality. She wrote like someone who was very clear about reality and had decided to refuse it. The entries from 1949 and 1950 are the ones Irene found hardest to read, not because they are violent or delusional, because they are heartbreaking. Dorothy writes about watching the mothers in Laurelhurst Park with the longing of someone looking through a window at a room they will never enter. She writes, "I see them with their children, and I understand that I have already lived the best of what I was going to have, and the rest is just days." And then, in a January 1951 entry, I have been thinking very carefully. That is the last entry before February 14th. After the kidnapping, the journals change. The fear is there in those early pages, documented the way a careful, private person documents fear. She writes about the weeks when Evan cried at night, when he called for his mother, when he asked about Neil. She writes about how she managed it, what stories she told, what distractions she found, how she slowly, carefully replaced one set of memories with another. She does not write about this with guilt. She writes about it as a problem being solved. One entry from March 1951, 6 weeks after the kidnapping, reads, "He called out for Mama last night. I went to him and held him and told him I was here. He let me hold him. That is progress. Progress." But then, and this is the thing that makes this case so impossible to hold, the journals become something else entirely. By the end of 1951, they read like any mother's diary. His first day at his new school, his preference for peanut butter over jam, the way he sang to himself while making his bed in the mornings, the way he asked questions constantly about everything in the car and at dinner and before sleep. She loved him. That is the conclusion Irene reached, and that Warren Mitchell confirmed without being asked. Whatever Dorothy Parsons was before February 14th, 1951, whatever broke in her, whatever she decided, she was, for 50 years afterward, his mother, completely, without reservation. Warren Mitchell, when asked about his childhood, said, "She was at every game. She knew every one of my teachers. She drove 4 hours to see me graduate college. She was wonderful." He paused. I don't know how to say that and also say what she did. But both of those things are true. The horror of this case is not that Dorothy Parsons was a monster. The horror is that she wasn't. In February 1951, the United States had no national missing children clearinghouse, no federal database linking state-level reports, no standardized protocol for sharing missing persons information across state lines. A bulletin issued by the Portland Police Department had no guaranteed mechanism to reach law enforcement in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Not automatically, not quickly, not at all, unless someone thought to call. And why would they call Albuquerque specifically? Dorothy had understood this. Her journals from the months before the kidnapping include a brief, chilling entry from December 1950 that reads simply, "The West is large." She moved fast, moved far, and then she was still. She didn't run again. She didn't change cities every few years. She settled. She became ordinary. She built a life that had no reason to attract attention. Evan Shaw's new identity was processed by an Albuquerque elementary school in September 1951, 8 months after the kidnapping. The school administrator asked for a birth certificate. Dorothy provided the Tucson document. The administrator looked at it, wrote Warren Mitchell in the enrollment ledger, and moved on to the next family in line. Why would they scrutinize it? There was no national registry of false documents, no database to check it against. A woman with a birth certificate and a child who called her mom was simply a woman with a birth certificate and a child who called her mom. Irene Blake described the systemic failure plainly. Evan Shaw wasn't lost. He was hidden. Those are two completely different problems, and in 1951, law enforcement only had tools for the first one. Between 1950 and 1965, more than 40,000 children were reported missing across the United States. The number of those cases resolved, confirmed, closed, identified, explained, in the modern DNA era is fewer than 200. Many of the original case files no longer exist. They were never digitized. Some were thrown away when departments moved buildings, some destroyed in floods or fires. Some are sitting in boxes in county records facilities that haven't been opened in 40 years. Evan Shaw's 1951 Portland report survived because Grace Shaw had made a photocopy the day she filed it and kept it in her own files, which Neil had preserved, which Hannah had inherited. One woman's private copy of a document the system might otherwise have lost. Remove Grace's copy, and Warren Mitchell lives out his days in Albuquerque as Warren Mitchell, and no one ever knows. Of the 7 journals in Dorothy's trunk, only one contains a direct return to the subject of Portland after those early 1951 entries. It is a single page, dated June 4, 1978. Warren Mitchell had gotten married that day. He was 33 years old. His wife, Eleanor, wore a cream dress. Dorothy sat in the front pew at St. Michael's in Albuquerque and watched her son at the altar. That evening, she wrote this. I watched him today at the altar, and I thought about Portland. I have not thought about Portland in years. I have learned not to. But today I did. I thought about the mother who lost him. I hope she has other children. I hope she has found some happiness. I hope she has forgiven herself for whatever she blames herself for, because she did nothing wrong. I did. I cannot undo it. All I can say is that he is a good man, a gentle man, a man who teaches children and remembers the names of everyone he meets, and makes people feel that they matter. Whatever I took from her, I made sure of that much. I am sorry for her. I am sorry every day. but I cannot be sorry that he is mine. I should be. I know I should be. But I am not. Irene Blake shared that entry with Warren Mitchell by email, along with scans of all 7 journals. He called her back 40 minutes later. His voice, Irene told Hannah afterward, was different from every previous call. Something in it had given way. He said, "She knew. She always knew. And she never—" He stopped. Irene waited. "She let me love her for 50 years, he said. She let me grieve her when she died. I sat at her bedside for 3 days, and I held her hand, and I told her she had been the best thing in my life. And she knew, the whole time. She knew what she had done, and she never told me." Irene said, "No, she didn't. She didn't give me the choice." His voice had gone flat, not cold, something past cold. "I could have, I don't know what I would have done. Gone back, maybe. When I was young and she was still alive. I could have met Neil. I could have, before he died, I could have—" He stopped again. This was the fracture, not the birth certificate, not the DNA match, not even the newspaper in the trunk. This, the understanding that Dorothy's silence had stolen not just his first identity, but every future choice he might have made with it, every reunion that was now impossible, every person he could have known who was now dead. After a long silence, he said, "I need a day." Irene said, "Of course." He said, "Tell Hannah I'm not going anywhere. I just need a day." He called back the next afternoon. "I've been building to this. Everything before, the DNA match, the false birth certificate, the dead doctor in the burned hospital, the trunk in the attic, the journals, the 1978 entry. All of it was the case being assembled piece by piece, evidence accumulating toward a verdict. But the bracelet is not evidence. The bracelet is something else. It's the moment where the story stops being a case and becomes something that happens in the chest." Hannah flew to Albuquerque in February 2025. She drove a rental car to the tan house on Hermosa Drive. Scrubby yard, a garden bed along the front walk, 3 terracotta pots flanking the door. A modest house, a tended house, the kind of house a retired teacher lives in after a quiet, decent life. She knocked. Warren Mitchell opened the door. She looked at his right wrist. Green stone, red thread. She stood there for a moment without saying anything. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "Yes, yes. Come inside?" They sat at his kitchen table. He made coffee. They talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things, the drive from the airport, the weather, his garden, the way people do when they are circling something large and need to approach it from a distance. Then Hannah opened her bag and took out a folder. She found the line in the 1951 police report. She slid it across the table and pointed. Child was wearing a green jade bracelet with red cord thread on right wrist. Family heirloom. Please report immediately. Warren read it. He looked at his right wrist. He looked at the report again. Hannah found the photograph. Grace Shaw on the Hancock Street porch steps, 1948. She slid that across, too. She pointed to Grace's wrist, where the bracelet was visible if you knew what you were looking for. Small, green, against the pale skin of a young woman squinting into morning light. Warren picked up the photograph. He held it close. He set it down. He said, My mother gave me this bracelet when I was 10. She said it had been passed down through her family. She said it was mine. He turned his wrist over, looking at the bracelet the way you look at something you've worn so long it has become part of your body. I've worn it every day. I never took it off. It felt wrong to take it off. Hannah said, "Your grandmother tied it on your wrist the morning you disappeared. It's in the police report that your mother filed that day. Green jade, red thread, right wrist. It was the first physical detail she gave them." Warren didn't speak for a long time. "Dorothy kept it," he said finally, not a question. "She kept it 4 years. Then she gave it to you and told you it was from her family." Hannah paused. "But it was yours. It had been yours from the beginning. You were wearing your own family's bracelet the entire time." Warren Mitchell set his coffee cup down very carefully. He pressed his left hand over his right wrist, over the bracelet, and held it there for a moment. Then, quietly, as if telling himself rather than Hannah, "I could feel it vibrate." Hannah looked at him. "When I was little," he said, "I always thought it was the stone, that there was something in the stone. Dorothy used to laugh at me about it, but I could feel it, something, against my pulse." Hannah's eyes filled. She told him what Grace had written in her journal on the morning of February 14th, 1951. Evan pressing the bracelet to his wrist, discovering his heartbeat. The loudest thing I've ever heard. Warren Mitchell, 79 years old, sitting at his kitchen table in Albuquerque, heard for the first time what he had been like at 6 years old. He put his face in his hands. Not crying exactly. Something older than crying. He sat like that for several minutes. Hannah did not say anything. There was nothing to say. This was not a moment for words. When Warren came back to himself, Hannah reached into her bag again. She had brought 3 things. First, the birthday letters, all 37, stacked in order, oldest to most recent, bound with the same rubber band Neil had put on them when he took the box from Grace's bedside drawer in 1988. Each envelope, "Dear Evan," Grace's handwriting, sealed, never stamped. She set the stack on the table between them. Warren looked at them. He said, "She wrote to me every year." Hannah said, "Every year, from 1952 until the year she died. Even when she didn't know if I was alive. Especially then." Hannah paused. She kept them because she believed she would find the address eventually. She never stopped believing that. Second, a photograph of Neil Shaw at age 42, taken outside Laurelhurst Park. You can see the iron gate slightly out of focus in the background. He's standing with his hands in his pockets, squinting into the light the way people do when someone has pointed a camera at them without asking. Big man, serious face, but something in the eyes that looked, Hannah had always thought, like he was watching for something. Warren held the photograph and looked at his brother for the first time in 73 years. "He looked for me," he said. It wasn't a question. His whole life. Warren set the photograph face up on the table next to the letters. He didn't let go of it immediately. He kept 2 fingers on the edge, as if it might move. Third, the backyard photograph. 2 boys, summer, a garden hose running in the background. Neil at 8, standing sideways, distracted. Evan at 4, looking directly at the camera with an expression of total, unguarded joy. Warren looked at it. He said, "That's me." "Yes." A long pause. Then, quietly, I look like the kind of kid who would have been a handful. Hannah laughed. It came out unexpected, and then she couldn't stop. And Warren looked up from the photograph and started laughing too, slightly bewildered by his own reaction. My dad used to say that, Hannah said when she could speak, about Evan's description in the police report. He'd read it every year and say, this child was going to be an absolute handful. Warren laughed again, then stopped, then looked at the photograph for a long time. He sounds like he was a good man, your dad. He was. He would have loved to meet you. I would have. Warren stopped. He smoothed the edge of the photograph. I'm sorry I wasn't findable. I want you to know that. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. Hannah said, you didn't know. I know, but I'm sorry anyway. I was right here the whole time. Dorothy Parsons had one other child, not biologically. In 1961, when Warren was 16, Dorothy adopted a 7-year-old girl through the New Mexico child welfare system. Her name was Virginia. She grew up in the same Albuquerque house as Warren, calling him her big brother, knowing nothing about Portland. Virginia Parsons was 64 years old in 2024. She lived in Phoenix. Irene Blake made the call to her in December 2024. It took 3 attempts before Virginia could stay on the line long enough to process what she was being told. Her first response? That's not possible. My mother was not that kind of person. Her second response, 48 hours later, a call to Irene at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Virginia sounding like someone who had been sitting with a thought all day and needed to say it aloud. My mother kidnapped a child. Irene said, yes. She did that. She did that, and she raised me. She raised us both. She was the most present parent I have ever seen in another human being. She was at everything. She knew everything about our lives. Virginia stopped. How do you do that? How do you love children that much, and also, how is that possible? Irene didn't answer. There wasn't an answer. A woman spent her whole life looking for her son, Virginia said. She died not knowing, and my mother knew. She sat in her apartment in her last years, and she knew, and she never. Her voice broke clean in half. She let me love her. She let me sit with her when she was dying, and she never told me. She could have told me. I was grown. I could have handled it. She could have let me try to fix it. She was crying now. She chose to die with it. And now Grace Shaw is dead, and Neil Shaw is dead, and I can't. There is no. She stopped. After a long time, she said, is Warren okay? Irene said yes. She told her about the meeting with Hannah, the letters, the bracelet. Virginia was quiet. Then, he wore the bracelet his whole life, his grandmother's bracelet, and he didn't know. No. She gave him his own grandmother's bracelet and told him it was from her family. She kept it 4 years, and then she gave it to him. She couldn't throw it away. Virginia's voice had gone very still. She knew what it was, and she gave it to him anyway. Why would she do that? Irene said, I think she wanted part of his real family to stay close to him. I think it was the only way she could give him that without telling him the truth. Virginia went quiet again. Then, very softly, she loved him that much, even while she was keeping him from the people who loved him first. She loved him that much. A pause. I don't know what to do with that. I've been sitting here for 2 days trying to figure out what to do with that, and I don't know. Irene said, You don't have to figure it out today. When does it get easier? Irene was honest. I don't know. Virginia said, I want to meet him. Warren. He's still my brother. Whatever she did, he's still my brother. Will you ask him if he'll see me? He said yes. They met in Albuquerque in March 2025. They spent 2 days together. What was said between them was private. Warren came away from it looking tired and something else Hannah couldn't name. Not worse, just more fully present. The way people look when they have said the unsayable and found it didn't destroy them. Warren Mitchell filed a legal petition for an amended identity record in March 2025. He did not erase Warren Mitchell. He expanded him. His legal name, as of May 2025, is Warren Evan Mitchell Shaw. He said, Warren is who I've been for 79 years. That's real. I can't unmake it, and I wouldn't if I could. It's my life, my children, my marriage, my work. It's who I am. But Evan is who I was first, before anyone made a choice for me. And Shaw is where I came from. All three of those things are true at the same time. I'm not going to pretend any of them didn't happen. He drove to Portland in May 2025. Hannah met him at the airport. He stood at the east gate of Laurelhurst Park, the same iron gate his brother had watched him walk through 74 years earlier, for approximately 20 minutes. Hannah stood beside him and didn't say anything. He told her afterward that it looked nothing like he'd expected. He'd hoped for something, some cellular memory, some recognition in the body of a place the brain no longer held. He'd been 6 years old. He had been in Albuquerque by the time he was old enough to lay down the kind of memories that stick. He felt nothing. Not recognition, not grief, not resolution. He stood there anyway, because a 6-year-old had waved goodbye from that gate, and the least the 79-year-old version of him could do was come back and acknowledge it. He visited the cemetery. Grace Shaw is buried in the Lone Fir Cemetery in southeast Portland, under a stone that lists her dates and, beneath her name, a line her son Neil had chosen. She kept looking. Warren stood at the grave for a long time. He told Hannah afterward that he didn't know what to call himself in relation to her, whether he had the right to the word son after 73 years of not knowing her. He said, I don't know if I was her son. I know she spent 37 years writing letters to someone she believed was her son. I know she never closed the file. He paused. I think that makes me her son whether I earned it or not. But I'm not sure I'm entitled to feel like one. He placed the jade bracelet on the headstone, left it there for a while, then picked it up and put it back on. Hannah asked him why. He said, She should have had it back. I know that. But I've worn it my whole life. I think she knew it was going somewhere safe when she put it on my wrist. I think that's why she put it on my wrist. He looked at it. I'll wear it for her. That's the best I can do. I want to tell you about the last letter. Warren read all 37 birthday letters over 4 days in January 2025. He told Hannah it took him 4 days because he had to stop frequently. He said they were not what he expected. He'd expected grief, concentrated, difficult grief, the kind that saturates paper. And the early ones, from the 1950s, were that. They were the letters of a woman writing into a void that might be anything. But by the mid-1960s, the letters had changed. They became ordinary. Grace wrote about the weather, about a television program she'd started watching, about the roses she'd planted along the back fence, about Neil's job, about her neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, who had a cat that kept getting into the garden. She wrote the way you write to someone who is away for a while and will be back. She maintained, for 37 years, in sealed and unstamped letters, the complete fiction that her son would someday read these words. She never stopped believing it. The last letter is dated February 14th, 1988, 37 years to the day. It begins, "I have been thinking about Valentine's Day all morning, as I always do. You would be 43 years old today. I wonder what you look like." It ends, "I haven't stopped. I want you to know that. Whatever happened, wherever you are, I haven't stopped. Happy birthday, my love. Come home when you can." Grace Shaw died 6 months later, August 1988. She never found out. Warren Mitchell, 79 years old, sitting in his tan house in Albuquerque, told Hannah what he thought Grace would have said if they had met. He said, "I think she would have looked at me for a long time. I think she would have put her hand on my face. She seemed like someone who would do that. And then I think she would have said she was glad I was okay. I think that's what she needed to know most, that I was okay." He stopped. "I wish I could have given her that." That sentence is where this story lives. Not in the DNA match or the birth certificate or the trunk in the attic. In that sentence. I wish I could have given her that. Because here is what this case forces you to sit with. Warren Evan Mitchell Shaw spent 73 years living a life that was real in every way that mattered. He loved people. He was loved. He taught hundreds of children history. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather. His life happened. The name was wrong. The origin story was a lie. But the life was his. And Grace Shaw spent 37 years writing letters to an address she didn't have. Both of those things were true at the same time. Both of them ran in parallel for 73 years. The same jade bracelet was an act of love and an act of theft. The same woman was a monster and a mother. The child she raised grew into a man who said, "I can hold her responsible. I can understand that what she did was a crime and a cruelty. But I can't hate her. She's the only mother I remember. And I'm sorry for Grace Shaw that that's true. I am genuinely, deeply sorry. But it is true." Is a life built on a lie still a life? I believe it is. I believe Warren Mitchell's 73 years count completely. And I believe that Grace Shaw's 37 letters count just as completely. And I believe those two things cannot be resolved. They can only be held. Dorothy Parsons made one decision on a Tuesday afternoon in February 1951. She created two simultaneous realities and sealed both of them shut. One person found peace inside them. One person spent her life pushing against them, writing to a ghost because she refused to accept that the ghost was permanent. She was right. He was there the whole time. She just ran out of time before the database caught up. Some stories don't resolve. Some stories just end, with the people in them still holding two things that don't fit together, trying to figure out how to carry both. That is this story. And I think Grace Shaw, who wrote 37 letters to a ghost because she refused to stop believing in a someday, I think she would have understood that. Warren Mitchell existed for 73 years. He was in Albuquerque. He was sitting at his kitchen table. He was wearing his grandmother's bracelet, and he had no idea. The database had Hannah's DNA. It just needed one more person, someone carrying 41% of the same genetic signature. One more entry. That's all the gap was. There are currently more than 85,000 active missing persons cases in the United States. A significant portion are cold, years or decades without a lead. Many of them will only be resolved the way Evan Shaw's was, not through police work or witnesses, but through a DNA match in a database that gets bigger every time one more person uploads. If you've been meaning to document your family history, do it. Upload to an ancestry platform, not for your own curiosity, though that's real too. For the Hannah Ellison who is checking her notifications every morning before work, waiting for a number that means something. For the Neil Shaw who checked every night before sleeping for 11 years and died without the answer. The answer was in the database. It just hadn't arrived yet. If this case moved you, if you got to the end of this and you're still thinking about a 6-year-old boy pressing a jade bracelet to his wrist and saying it was the loudest thing he'd ever heard, share this video. Not for the channel, for Grace Shaw, for the 37 letters, for the idea that some stories deserve to be heard. Subscribe if you're new. Evan Shaw disappeared from a Portland park on Valentine's Day, 1951. He was 6 years old. He was wearing a jade bracelet. He is 79 years old now. He is okay. He is living in a tan house in Albuquerque with a garden he tends every morning, wearing a bracelet he now knows the full history of. And 37 sealed envelopes finally have somewhere to go.